Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. This video is made for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the federal courtroom trial of Sean "Diddy" Combs, as reported by Inner City Press. On day 17, the courtroom held its breath as the judge called the next witness, a name no one anticipated: Jack Nicholson. The legendary actor, largely absent from public life in recent years, emerged from the shadows not to discuss films or fame, but to break a silence that had haunted him for over a decade. What he shared stunned everyone. From intimate group baths with A-list celebrities to a night that changed everything, Nicholson described a disturbing descent into a hidden world of power, pleasure, and intimidation. What began as eccentric fun among Hollywood elite soon spiraled into fear, secrecy, and a threat that Jack says scarred him for life.
Okay, for now, focus here for a minute. Don't worry, their drama will keep going on. Think a little about yourself too. An Indonesian scientist has uncovered a shocking truth about belly fat, and it has nothing to do with diet or exercise. 95% of people who tried this strange bedtime ritual lost 25 pounds or more. Some even dropped over 50, all while sleeping. No gym, no starving, just one simple step before bed. It sounds crazy, but it's backed by science. Tap the link in the description and see for yourself.
This is his story. The courtroom was thick with anticipation as Jack Nicholson, now 87 and rarely seen in public, stepped forward. He moved slowly, leaning slightly as he walked to the witness stand. His face, once iconic for its mischievous grin, now carried the weight of decades, and something deeper: pain, regret, trauma. The judge instructed him to speak clearly. Jack adjusted his tinted glasses, cleared his throat, and began. "I knew Sean Combs back when people still called him Puffy," he said. "Back before all the mogul stuff, when the parties were loud, wild, but still fun." Jack recalled the early 2000s, a time when his own fame had mellowed, but Diddy's was rising like a rocket. He was magnetic. Everyone wanted to be around him, Jack said. The parties were legendary. Mansions in the hills, oceanside retreats, the kind of nights where you forget who you are. He laughed slightly, then stopped himself. It wasn't all bad at first. A lot of stars came through. Tom Hanks, Pacino, Clooney. It felt like a fraternity of fame. But then he described something he called the trust baths. Jack claimed that Diddy began hosting late-night, invitation-only events that took place in an enormous marble bath inside his Beverly Hills estate. At first, it sounded funny. Weird, but funny. We'd sit in this steaming bath, 20 guys, cigars in hand, talking about nothing. It was supposed to be a symbol of openness, of breaking ego. That's what Diddy said. The gallery was silent. We were all naked. No cameras, no phones, just steam, laughter, and a strange feeling that something was being tested. He looked toward the jury. "You weren't allowed to say no. Not without consequences." Jack then leaned in and added, "And I didn't know what those consequences were. Until later." His voice cracked just slightly. "At the time, I thought I was in control. But I wasn't. None of us were." Jack Nicholson leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance. "The first time I realized something was wrong was the night I saw Tom Hanks leave early," he said. "Tom's not the kind of guy to bail on a party. But he got up, towel over his shoulders, and just walked out. No goodbye. Just gone." Jack paused. "I found out later that Diddy had whispered something to him. I never asked what." He recounted how the atmosphere at Diddy's infamous trust baths gradually shifted. What started as absurd and harmless evenings of powerful men bonding in steam turned into something that felt curated, manipulated. It was never about the bath. It was about who would stay, who could take it, who could obey. Jack listed names, big ones. Hanks, Pacino, sometimes Jamie Foxx. Once I even saw Pharrell walk in and walk right back out. Diddy didn't like that, said he lacked spiritual curiosity. But it wasn't just who attended, it was the rules. No talking once inside, no questioning the music, a loop of slow jazz and ambient noise that played on hidden speakers, no sudden movements. You just sat there and let the heat eat at your skin while Diddy watched, Jack said. Sometimes he'd get in last. Sometimes he'd already be in, eyes closed, like a monk. And then there was the incense. It smelled like cedar and something else I couldn't place. Something chemical. People got drowsy. I got drowsy. Jack says that after one bath, he woke up in a lounge chair in a different room. No one else was around. Just me, and a copy of The Art of War on my lap. He described how Diddy began testing boundaries. One night, he instructed the group to switch places in silence every time the jazz track looped. We were supposed to rotate, sit closer, brush shoulders. It was a game, but it wasn't a game. Jack looked down, his voice dropping. We weren't guests anymore. We were part of something we didn't understand. And Diddy? He was the conductor. Jack's voice grew quieter as he continued. There was one night that still makes my skin crawl, he said, his fingers subtly clenching the edges of the witness stand. It started like all the others. The bath, the jazz, the incense. But there was a difference. Diddy was already in the tub, grinning. Too wide, like he knew something we didn't. He recalled how Diddy motioned for everyone to come in. Usually it was optional, at least the illusion of choice. But that night, there was no illusion. Nicholson said that several men, some familiar, some not, stepped into the water. We sat in silence, shoulder to shoulder, the steam rising so thick you could barely see across the room. But you could hear. You could feel. Then Jack said something changed. I heard murmuring. It wasn't just the music. It was low, guttural, like chanting. And I looked across the tub and saw Diddy staring at me. Not at the group. Me. His eyes didn't blink. Jack's breath caught for a moment. Then he continued. Then things escalated. A few of the men began to engage each other. Sexually. Not passionately. Not romantically. Like it was scripted. Like they were puppets in a play no one agreed to watch. He shifted uncomfortably. That was the moment the fun stopped. That was the moment I realized I had walked into something I couldn't laugh off anymore. Nicholson looked toward the judge, then to the jury. I tried to get out. I stood up, said something like, I'm out. This ain't for me. But before I could step out, Diddy stood too. Water dripping from his chest, he came right up to me, inches from my face. And he said, Jack paused, his voice trembling for the first time. You ever talk about this, you old man? You'll regret it. Just like that. Quiet. Cold. Like it wasn't even a threat. Just a fact. Gasps swept the courtroom. I've seen darkness, Jack said. I've made movies about monsters. But nothing I've ever played came close to the look in his eyes that night. He sat back slowly, drained. That's the night I stopped being Jack Nicholson, the actor, and started being Jack Nicholson, the man trying to forget. Silence swallowed the courtroom as Jack Nicholson pressed forward, his hands trembling slightly on the wooden edge of the witness stand. After that night, he said, something in me broke. I didn't go to the next gathering. didn't answer his calls. But the thing is, Diddy doesn't like silence. He takes it personally. Jack described how, in the weeks following the bath incident, the pressure began. It started subtly. An assistant he hadn't heard from in years suddenly reappeared, asking questions under the guise of catching up. Then came the gifts. A Rolex, unopened bottles of scotch sent to my gate. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But the silence didn't last. Jack recounted one disturbing moment when a man he didn't recognize showed up outside his Mulholland Drive home. He was just standing there at 3 a.m. by my gate, looking up. Didn't say a word. When I shouted, he turned and walked into the dark. Nicholson admitted that his paranoia grew. I started canceling appearances. I turned down interviews, red carpets. People thought I was just getting old, becoming reclusive. But I was hiding. His voice cracked. Because I knew what I saw. And I knew that man could reach anyone, anywhere. Then came the grabs. Jack's hand tightened into a fist. I was at an event at Chateau Marmont, 2010. I hadn't seen Diddy in years, thought I was safe. But as I was leaving the men's room, he was just there, standing by the exit, like he'd been waiting. Jack said Diddy walked up and wrapped an arm around his shoulder. He whispered, "Jack, you still remember, don't you?" And then he squeezed my neck. Not hard, just enough to say, "I could." He reported a second encounter, this time at a private Oscar after-party in 2013. He pulled me into a side room. I tried to push past him, but he grabbed me by the jacket, brought his face close, and said, "We still good, right? You're not trying to get famous off my name, are you?" Jack's voice lowered, eyes flickering with something that looked like fear. I laughed it off. That's what I always did. But inside, I was shaking. I left the party early. I didn't go to the Oscars again after that. The courtroom was frozen. Jack Nicholson, the man behind Hollywood's most fearless roles, had become a prisoner of his silence. "I don't scare easy," he said, but he got to me. And for the first time in my life, I was truly afraid. Jack Nicholson took a slow breath, his gaze scanning the jury box with a haunted kind of calm. "It's one thing to be threatened," he said, "but it's another when the world helps the threat blend in, smiles at it, praises it, gives it awards." He paused, then added bitterly, "Hollywood loves forgetting." Jack described how over the years he watched Diddy climb higher, even as his own fears kept him quiet. "There were nights I'd see him on TV, holding Grammys, giving speeches about power and legacy, and all I could think about was that bath, that stare, that warning." He tried to bury it. I tried therapists. I tried isolation. Hell, I even tried mushrooms in the desert with some actor friends. Nothing worked. Because when you've seen something that dark, it doesn't let go. Then Jack said something that made the entire courtroom lean forward. "I kept a record. Not just memories. I wrote things down." He explained that after the Chateau Marmont incident, he began documenting every strange encounter, every unexpected visit, every moment he felt watched. I called it the Red File. I figured if anything ever happened to me, I wanted the truth to outlive me. He described entries noting sudden visits from old contacts he hadn't spoken to in decades, all with vague, probing questions about his relationship with Diddy. He listed unexpected invitations to events that turned out to be traps, filled with familiar faces who didn't dare ask why he looked uncomfortable. They knew, Jack said. They just didn't want to know. The jury listened as Jack described how his personal assistant once found a handwritten note slipped under the gate at his home. It read simply, "You talk, you fall." The police dismissed it as a prank. "But I knew," he said. "I knew it was real." He then opened a manila folder he had brought with him and passed it to the court clerk. Inside were photocopies of handwritten journal pages, dated and signed, detailing events from 2005 to 2018. "You don't forget moments like that," Jack said. "So I wrote them down. Every bath, every word, every threat." His voice dropped. "Because if I died without saying this, it'd mean he won." The courtroom remained gripped as Jack Nicholson's testimony veered into territory no one expected. The emotional aftermath. You spend your whole life playing tough guys on screen, pretending bullets can't hurt you. Pretending madness is something you control, Jack said, his voice softening. But this broke me. He described waking up in cold sweats, doors locked 3 times over, lights on in every room. I couldn't sleep in silence anymore. Every creak sounded like him, every shadow, a reminder of what I saw and what I was told to forget. Jack admitted that for a long time he questioned his own sanity. "I thought maybe I'd made it all up. Convinced myself the bath wasn't that strange, the threat wasn't that real. But that's how they win. They convince you that silence is sanity." He revealed that the fear spilled into his work. "I turned down roles, big ones, not because I was tired, because I didn't want to be seen. Visibility meant questions. Questions meant risk." Nicholson revealed that in 2014, he almost agreed to write a memoir, but pulled out at the last minute after receiving an anonymous call at 2:12 a.m. The voice on the other end simply said, "Be careful, Jack." "I smashed the recorder I'd been using to dictate the first few chapters," he said, smiling grimly. "And that was that." "But the breaking point came," he said, "not with a threat, but with a child. I was at a small charity event in 2016. Some young actor, barely 20, came up to me and said he was honored to be invited to one of Diddy's private parties. He said it with excitement, with pride, and I froze." Jack looked down. "I didn't say anything. I just nodded. That night, I cried. Not for me, for him." It was then that Jack decided to begin compiling the red file. Not just for himself, but for others. "Because I knew there would come a time when this man's empire would crack. And when it did, I wanted to be ready." He looked toward Diddy's defense table. "I know what I saw. I know what you did. And no amount of fame, money, or fear will stop me from saying it. Not anymore." Gasps filled the courtroom once more as Jack sat back, jaw clenched, eyes full of fire. Jack Nicholson leaned forward, gripping the microphone with both hands. "This isn't just about me," he said firmly. "I'm not the only one who saw things. I'm not the only one who was warned. I'm just the one too old to care what happens if I speak now." He shifted in his seat. "You want to know how deep this goes? I once saw Tom Hanks leave one of those parties. Barefoot, no coat, walking straight into the street. He didn't say a word, just walked, like something inside him had shut off." The courtroom was stunned. Jack didn't elaborate further. "I'm not saying what happened to him, that's for him to say, but I know that look, because I had it too." Nicholson described a disturbing moment during the filming of a late 2000s movie, when another actor, a younger man, came to him visibly shaken. He said Diddy had invited him to a retreat in Aspen, said it felt more like an initiation than a vacation. Told me there were cameras, told me there were rules. told me he didn't feel like himself anymore. Jack said he advised him to walk away from Hollywood altogether. He did. You wouldn't know his name now, but you might have, had he stayed. The actor explained that over the years, he'd heard whispers of a so-called circle, a group of celebrities, producers, and executives, all under Diddy's influence, all attending the same gatherings, all keeping the same secrets. They don't need to meet often, Jack said. Just enough to remind each other that silence is the currency they all trade in. He paused before revealing what he called the worst moment, a voicemail. It came in 2020. I was already retired, hadn't spoken to anyone in the industry for over a year. The message was short. A distorted voice, it said, "The bathhouse never closed." Jack told the court he interpreted it as a threat, a reminder that Diddy's reach was still strong. I thought about burning the red file. I really did. I thought maybe staying quiet until the grave was safer. But then I saw what happened this year. The arrests, the raids, the other testimonies, and I knew it was time. He looked at the gallery, voice shaking. "If I'm lying, let the truth find me. But if I'm not, then let this trial be the door that never closes again." The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, each word from Jack Nicholson's mouth turning up the heat. "You want to know why so many of us stayed quiet for so long?" he said, his voice low but laced with urgency. "Because the silence doesn't just protect the powerful, it protects the entire machine they built." Jack looked directly at the jury now. "You think if I had said this 10 years ago, people would have believed me? They'd have called me crazy, senile, said I was drunk again or confused. That's the beauty of age in Hollywood. Once you're no longer profitable, you're disposable. And your truth, it goes out with you." He paused, scanning the sea of frozen faces in the courtroom. But I realized something. Fear ages too. And mine got tired. Jack recounted an incident in 2021 that pushed him toward finally stepping forward. "I was approached by a young actress at a private screening. She told me she'd been invited to the real after party. When I asked who by, she said, 'The man who makes careers overnight.' I didn't even need to ask who that was." That phrase, "makes careers overnight," haunted Jack. "That's how they trap you," he said. "They offer you the dream, then lock the door behind you." Diddy wasn't the only one doing it, but he perfected it. He told the court he believed many others were still too afraid to come forward. They're scared of being blacklisted, scared of the tapes, scared of the network that doesn't forget. Jack paused, pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket, and read aloud. "If I disappear, I want it on record. I never slipped. I never relapsed. I never wandered off into the woods like some recluse. If I go, it's because someone sent me there. I wrote that 3 years ago, just in case." The room was breathless. "Look," he said, voice now gravel-thick. "I know this testimony's going to be picked apart. The blogs will run their headlines. The podcasts will call it another celebrity meltdown. But I'm telling the truth. For me, for anyone still stuck in that nightmare, and for those who didn't make it out." He stared at Diddy one last time. "You called me an old man. But guess what? I'm still here. And I remember everything." Jack Nicholson leaned back in the witness chair, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion but alive with purpose. "I didn't come here for revenge," he said, his voice steadier than it had been all day. "I came here for clarity, for peace, for truth, the kind they said would never see daylight." The courtroom sat still as he continued. There's a whole generation of artists, actors, musicians, models who thought they were walking into opportunity and instead got pulled into a cage. Some of them never realized it until it was too late. Some of them still haven't. And some of them are buried with secrets they were too scared to tell. His voice cracked. I've carried too many of those ghosts. He spoke about his last conversation with a fellow actor, unnamed but clearly once famous, who had left the industry after a private party in Malibu in 2008. He told me, "Jack, I saw things I can't unsee. They'll never touch me again, but they don't need to. The memory is the cage." Jack paused. He hasn't acted since. Then came one final blow. Jack revealed that during the height of his paranoia in 2017, he hired a private investigator to follow Diddy for 2 weeks. What they reported back chilled him to his core. A series of meetings held in unregistered properties, blacked-out SUVs transporting unknown guests, and, most disturbingly, security footage of a hot tub party eerily similar to what Jack had experienced more than a decade earlier. He passed the grainy, time-stamped screenshots to the court. The judge allowed them into evidence. This wasn't some past life trauma, Jack said. This was still happening. He closed with a final message to the jury and to the world watching. I'm not a perfect man. Hell, I've made my mistakes. I've kept quiet when I should have screamed. But I won't die with this weight still on me. A beat passed before he spoke again. I testified because I don't want another kid to walk into a mansion thinking they're about to be famous, and walk out with something stolen they can never get back. He stood, hands shaking, and addressed Diddy directly one last time. You tried to bury us in shame, but now it's your turn to answer for what you did in the dark. And with that, Jack Nicholson, legend, survivor, witness, stepped down from the stand.